Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's class on developing global supply chain strategies. Now, many times in my classes, we go over supply chain case studies. And in those case studies, we come across big global leaders who were able to make huge global corporations successfully. And the one question that I've many times asked my students is that what was in them that was made them successful and differentiated them from other people. Surprisingly, if you looked into the background of these highly successful people, they didn't always have a lot of resources. They weren't necessarily born with a silver spoon. They all had their set of challenges. And yet, somehow or the other, they were able to achieve success well above and beyond the average human being. And so the first thing that many times comes up is that they were hardworking. But there are a lot of hardworking people who unfortunately don't really make it in the world. So as we delve deeper, we usually realize that successful people are by and large dreamers. They dream big and they set very big, lofty goals for themselves. And though they are dreamers, they are also very realistic. They understand that they don't have all the resources. It's not going to be an easy task for them to achieve their goals. But once they decide on a particular goal, they navigate their way towards that goal. Given the resources that they have, they do not give up. They are resilient. And these are some of the qualities that help them become extremely successful. These successful people also usually are builders of, many times build large corporations. And again, what they're successfully able to do is infuse a vision. They set their aims high and they make sure that everybody across the company also has a similar vision and that everybody is working towards that vision. Is it easy? Absolutely not. But once there is conviction and there's determination, then nothing is impossible. So effectively speaking, if we everything that I've spoken about, if we look at it from a managerial point of view, this is all about developing strategies. And companies that have a very clear vision, strong leadership, and the leadership is able to make a good strategy are companies that usually succeed. That being said, I am now going to start talking a little bit more about this interesting word of strategy. If we do a little bit of research on the word strategy, it actually originates from a Greek word strategia, which means the art of the general. It's basically was known in its origins as a high-level plan to achieve one or more goal under conditions of uncertainty. The word first came into use in the 6th century in Rome, and eventually it began to be used in the Western language in the 18th century. Initially, this word was used, as mentioned just a little while ago, its meaning, it's a Greek word, and its meaning is the art of the general. And so from that, you can see that it has a lot to do with the military. And so originally, this was a word that was widely used in the military And basically in the military, strategy is known to be the utilization during both peace and war of all the nation's forces through large-scale, long-range planning and development to ensure security and victory. Okay, so again, you can see over here, the end goal is security, victory, and their, the utilization of resources in the best way possible. Okay. Also, strategy in the military is known as the art of planning and directing overall military operations and movement in a war or battle. Now, this word was used in the military, as I mentioned, for centuries, and it's been, it was a very popular word in the military. But if we look at the business world, the first time this word was introduced in the business world was actually in the 1960s. And this word began to become very popular around the 1960s, as well as the word competition. Both of these words became, kept coming up in management journals and research. And in management, strategy is basically known to be a plan or action designed to achieve a long-term goal or an overall aim. So again, a plan of action designed to achieve, a long-term goal. Generally speaking, a strategy is also known as how the goals will be achieved by means of limited resources. So again, if we really think about everything I just mentioned, there are a lot of different parts to strategy. The first part is you need to have a long-term goal. You need to have an overall aim. And the next part of the puzzle is that you will have limited resources, right? But the whole idea is you want to achieve your long-term goal despite the limited resources. And those, of course, that are able to do this are the winners in the game. Okay, so when we're talking about making strategies, there are two basic parts to this. The first part is formulation of a strategy. And this involves really analyzing your environment. So if you're making a strategy, you definitely cannot be living in a cave, not knowing what's happening in the world. You really need to immerse yourself in the environment, in the current situation, understand the overall scenario very well. And that will give you a good sort of idea. It will help you develop your strategy, right? And so after you develop your strategy, the next part is implementing the strategy. And here, if you're planning on implementing your strategy, then you need to have action plans. And those action plans need to help you achieve your goal. Now, again, if you have a big company and you're making a strategy, many times, in management, one of the key things actually that Deming is a management guru. And one of the big things that Deming always mentions is that it's very important for everybody in an organization to have the same vision. So you can definitely come up with a strategy. You can definitely have a long-term vision as a leader, but it's not enough for just the leader to have that vision. The vision needs to be infused throughout the organization. The entire organization needs to believe in that vision, and only then will they help you develop action plans and achieve that vision. So everybody needs to own that vision. When they own it, then they organically start making action plans that are able to achieve the goals for the organization. All right. So now, next, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this whole idea of developing a strategy. How do you do it? Where do you start? How do what if, you know it's not only about developing strategies for companies. This would also apply to developing a strategy for a person, individual as well. So let's break it down. There are a couple of steps that need to be taken. The first step is analyze the environment in which an organization operates. Now, this is, on one hand, it's it can be easy, right? Okay, just look around, talk to people. There's a lot of emphasis on networking, meet a bunch of different people. But if you really want to do and understand your environment, you need to do a lot of. It's almost like internal soul searching, but also externally you need to really do a lot of research. So here, I've met, it's mentioned on the slide, you really need to understand the external environment, understand what's happening politically, economically, socially, technologically, legally, environment wise, what's going on a big grand scale level. Also, if you are thinking of entering one particular industry, you really want to understand the competitive behavior of rival organizations in that industry, the bargaining power of customers, suppliers. Are there any threats of new entrants? And there are some tools that can help you do this, and I'll be discussing one of them. But you really want to get a deep understanding of the industry that you're considering entering. Also, if you are, you have a small company, you're thinking of entering maybe, expanding, going into a different industry, or you may be an individual and you're trying to figure out, your strategy for yourself. Either ways, it's very important for you to understand your strengths and weaknesses. If you are leading a company, again, you really want to understand the company's strengths, weaknesses, and the resources that are on hand, right? And so you, of course, have to be very, very honest when you're doing this kind of an assessment. That honesty is actually sometimes a little difficult, but very important for you to understand. So the first step, again, of developing a strategy is really getting a in-depth understanding of your, the external environment, the internal environment, and so gathering of information, lots and lots of information, right? And then the next step is basically making. And so the next step after you analyze the environment is that you basically develop a series of goals or objectives and measures for the organization to pursue. So once you've understood the environment, you then make a very calculated decision about what your long-term goal is going to be. And once you know that, then you also break that into actionable tasks so that you can achieve your long-term goal. And you also want to make sure that you don't just sit back. You regularly measure whether or not you're on the right track or not. Now, if you're in the process of actually building a strategy, there are a series of leading questions that an organization can ask itself. For example, I'm just going to go through a couple of these. These are questions that, if you're sitting down, you want to develop a strategy from getting from point A to point B. These are some of the questions you should be asking. First one, what is the organization's business? High-level question. Who is the target customer of the organization, products and services? Where are the customers and how do they buy? What is considered value to the customer? Which businesses, products and services should be included or excluded from the portfolio of offerings? What is the geographic scope of the business? What differentiates the company from its competitors in the eyes of customers and other stakeholders? Which skills and capabilities should be developed within the firm? What are the important opportunities and risks for the organization? How can the firm grow through both its base business and new business? How can the firm generate more value for investors? Now, it is what, definitely the first thing to know is that, you have to have a long-term goal. And that's the overall corporate kind of a strategy. The company, let's say it's a local company, maybe, for example, in the case of Uniqlo, the CEO, started his journey, in around, and basically said that, I want to be, perhaps he set his aim out to be a global brand. It was a small company, working out of Japan, and making suits. And at that time, when he started off, he probably had a vision in mind where he wanted a global brand, right? And so that would be his overall high level corporate strategy. But that's the high level corporate strategy. But then he also needed to develop business unit departmental strategies. So in order for him to get from a small shop in Japan to becoming a global brand, he needed to develop strategies of how his supply chain management is going to be. What is his marketing going to be like? And so all of those strategies beautifully tied in with the overarching strategy of becoming, a global brand. And so together then, when all of these things work together, that's how, effectively companies are able to reach the final destination, achieve their goals. And so to implement strategy, goals are established under the guiding strategy, right? Something that is very important to mention is, and I've mentioned this already in this class, but I want to repeat it, is that you may have a long-term goal, but generally speaking, there are always certain resource constraints. And so that's a fundamental dichotomy, or also known, you can think of it as a fundamental challenge for any organization. So, let's say, for example, organization wants to expand. All right, great. The organization wants to expand. That's part of its strategy, long-term strategy. But there may be certain constraints, money constraints. There may be, maybe labor is very difficult to hire in a particular area that they need labor in. Well, that's just something that some companies are able to think through those problems creatively and come up with very creative solutions and solve those problems. And again, they don't allow themselves to get off of the direction that they're in, the long-term strategy. I mean, that's the foremost thing for them. And they think of creative ways to solve all the problems that come in between them and that objective. And so this is just something to keep in mind. So if we talk a little bit just about, not the overall strategy, but just supply chain strategy, which is, a departmental strategy. And we kind of try and understand what is a good supply chain strategy and why is it important. Here's a great, this will give you an idea of what a good supply chain strategy should be like. So a good supply chain strategy should be comprehensive, integrated, clear, feasible, consistent both internally and externally, sufficiently supportive, competitively advantageous, not wasteful, and not riskier than is acceptable to the organization. So there are so many different variables that need to be considered when making a good supply chain strategy, right? But if you are able to make a good supply chain strategy, then it has a lot of benefits. It will help you reduce your supply chain costs, reduce your inventory levels, improve your customer service, reduce interdepartmental conflicts, and so overall it will just have a whole lot of benefits, and it's well worth it. All right, now that being said, for the rest of this class, I actually want to introduce you to some tools to help companies make their strategy. Because up till now, we've really just been discussing all these concepts of strategy, but there are tools that, in management sciences have developed, and these tools can be very helpful for various aspects of developing a strategy. I do not expect any of you to become subject matter experts in these tools, but I do expect you to have a general understanding that these tools exist, so that if ever you need to go back and actually develop a strategy, you know exactly where you can go, what resources and tools are available to help you for building various aspects of strategy. So the first thing that, and we had mentioned, and I had mentioned this about, when you're developing strategy, it's very important for you to understand your industry, to understand your external environment. So one of the tools that I'm going to introduce to you right now is called the Porter's 5 Forces. And this tool basically helps you understand the industry that you are considering entering in. So again, through this tool, you can understand how competitive the industry is, how profitable the industry is, and the general attractiveness of the industry. So there are 5 forces. I'm going to take you through each one of them. The first force is rivalry amongst existing competitors. So in this, basically what you need to understand is that in the particular industry, let's say, again, you're a company that's interested in entering an industry, maybe you're thinking of setting up let's say a textile mill or a cement factory. Well, the first thing you want to know is how many competitors are in that industry. What is the market growth rate? Is it growing? If it's not growing very big and there are a lot of competitors, then you may want to reconsider entering that industry. On the other hand, market rate, if the growth rate is very high, not very many competitors, that's a very good situation. The balance of supply versus demand, you also want to understand if, if there's a lot of demand and there's not enough supply, that means that there's room for you to enter. And it's a good situation to be in. Vice versa, not a good situation to be in, right? If there's a lot of supply and not a lot of demand, then again, not very feasible to enter that industry. Next thing to look at is the threat of new entrants. So in this, Porter's second force is, understanding if you are planning to enter an industry, is it, will you easily be able to access specific technology? Are there, channels, let's say you want to sell things to your customers, will you be able to use those channels? Or are they just maybe too expensive? Are they within reach? Scarcity of specialized personnel, is it easy to hire people? Does this particular industry require a heavy investment in assets? Expectation of retaliation if you enter? All of these kind of questions, very important to understand. If you are a new entrant, what are all the issues that you can potentially face? And once you know them, then you can make a very informed decision. Third force, ease of substitution. Is the product that you're planning to bring into the market can it easily be substituted by customers? If so, again, you're facing a pretty tough situation. There was, for example, a company by the name of Kodak in Rochester. They had their head office, a very large company that when, there were the cameras with the film that needed to be developed, there were like, you know, the one of the biggest global brands for you know, films. And so, you know, that they were doing very well, but then these digital cameras came out. They tried to continue to compete, but, you know, today Kodak is no more. And so you need to really understand if there is a lot of ease of substitution for your products, that can be a potential problem. So you really need to analyze and look very carefully. Next up is the relative power of suppliers. Here you are, you know, if the suppliers are very powerful, it can be difficult in certain cases to work with them. If there are, let's say, very few suppliers, you know, there aren't any substitutes for the materials that they're providing, and it's expensive to switch suppliers, then the suppliers in that particular industry are very powerful, and this may be something that you could potentially run into problems. So, you know, again, something to really understand very well. Also, the relative power of customers. So if customers have, for example, customers are highly informed, they have thousands of different options, and your product is just going to be, you know, one of the 1,000 different options, that means the customers are very powerful. And if, you know, if the customers have a very high buying power, all of these things, and they're, that's something again to consider, right? So all of these 5 forces, these basically, if you analyze them and you really delve deep into them, you will be able to understand the industry that you are operating in very well. And again, that's the first step effectively of making a good strategy. Now, the next tool that I want to introduce you to is called the Blue Ocean Strategy. And this is basically a tool to understand where your company is standing at as compared to other competitors. And this tool should help you plan and develop a strategy accordingly. All right, so if I'm going to try and give you a high level understanding of the Blue Ocean Strategy now. So according to this, this type of, you know, strategy starts, you have to think of it this way, that, you know, sometimes in an established industry, there are so many competitors that it becomes very difficult for a company to sustain themselves. And so this is what, you know, according to the Blue Ocean Strategy, this is when companies are in a red ocean. Red ocean basically means, again, a lot of competition, and it's just very difficult to get a, you know, good market share, just because, you know, there's just so many people competing in the same market. And so the opposite is a blue ocean. And this basically happens when some of the people from that red ocean decide to make a switch and to innovate or expand. And they do this in order to get into a new market where there's not a lot of competition. So again, when companies, and again, there's this particular slide I'd like you to have a look at. Here you see that these are fish bowls. And in this fish bowl, for example, there's just so many different fish. This would be considered, you know, companies working in a red ocean. And then this one fish just decided that, you know, they just had enough of it. It just was too difficult to sort of survive. And so it made a huge effort. And this jump over here is signifying that effort. And they decided to jump into a different fish bowl, which is going to be also called the blue ocean. And here they made this big shift, which signifies some sort of an innovation, or they're expanding into a new market. And once they're in this new area, it's it's a lot easier for them to survive and they are able to thrive. So the question is, again, if somebody really wants to get out of this red ocean and jump into this blue ocean, how do you do it? And so the blue ocean strategy actually gives you some ideas of how to do it. And again, there's one side over here that just explains blue ocean and red ocean, and you can read it at your leisure. But again, I'm now going to talk to you a little bit about how a company is supposed to make this huge jump, okay, huge jump, and get into a blue ocean. So the first step is you kind of need to understand your competitors. You need to understand what all of these different fish are doing, okay? And so what you do is that you pick, let's say a top four, 3 or 4 of these, your top competitors, and you list some competitive factors, right, within the industry, top things that, companies are competing on. And then you rate each one of these from 1 to 5, and you basically get a score, right? Okay, so it could be for example for iPhones, and these are all phones. So maybe one of the factors that you will want to say is, okay, the price, okay? And so you can, oops, let me just try and change that. So here I'll say, price is one attribute. Maybe the thinness is another big attribute, and oops, sorry about that, thinness. And then the speed, right? And so you can list out a bunch of different key attributes, and basically then after that, for each one of these, you can give them a score. So maybe iPhone, I'll say, okay, you know what? Since 1 is the worst, I'm going to give it a 1 because it's really, really expensive. So I'm just going to say, you know what? In terms of price, I say, I'm going to give this a 1. And so you rate basically each one of these, and you go through, and then at the end, you come up with a score. So, the iPhone is going to have a score for pricing, Droid is going to have a score, and Moto X is going to have a score. And so then you go ahead and you plot these, right? And so you plot these. So, for example, the iPhone 5, you've plotted all of the scores that you found over here for each of the attributes. You plot them out, right? And here you can see that you can visually see, for each one of these attributes, they're different for each of these brands have a different rating for these attributes. Now that you know what your competitors are doing, you can then devise another strategy, on these key factors. And in order to do that, what the Blue Ocean strategy suggests is, pick some factors. So you definitely want to place yourself, you want to rate yourself also, and put yourself on the strategy canvas. And once you're on the strategy canvas and you look at what all your competitors are doing, you want to understand what factors you should just eliminate. Maybe there's a factor that, you just feel that you don't even need to compete on that particular attribute, just eliminate it. You should try and understand which attributes or factors should be reduced below the industry standard, what factors should be raised above the industry standard. And above all, you need to figure out what you should create that the industry has never offered before. So it's not enough, again, to just compete within the red ocean. You want to be able to create something, innovate, expand, do something that's different as compared to your competitors, so that you are able to differentiate yourself. and you're in a much better situation. So this is again another tool that is helpful in developing, a company's strategy. Okay, next up, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about another tool called the SWOT analysis. And for those of you who have done, marketing courses, and I'm sure you've heard about the SWOT analysis, this tool is basically a tool to better understand your own company and to devise a strategy accordingly. So again, let's say you're in a company right now, the company is not doing as well as you really want it to do. And so you decide to really come up with, do a deep dive to understand your own company. This is a great tool to use. So, in a SWOT analysis, there are certain internal factors that you need to really understand and analyze. So the first thing is you want to understand your own internal strengths. What are the company's strengths? What does the organization do very well? What are its expertise? And then some other internal factors you need to understand is, what is the organization really not doing well in? What does it lack? And so these, again, this is sometimes a little bit difficult because, everybody has, an ego, organizations, especially heads of organizations, but it's very important to really be completely honest about these and really think through it very well. And then you also want to understand the external factors. What are, for example, the future opportunities for the organization? How can it really, what can it do? What are the opportunities in that the environment is offering? And you also want to understand another external factor, which is what are the threats? What future threats are looming for the organization? Right? So maybe there's some new technology that's coming up, could be anything, external that is really could be a problem in the future for the organization. Just to give you, this slide gives an example for Apple. This is a SWOT analysis that, somebody's done for Apple in the year 2015. And, I'm not going to go in too much detail. You can definitely look into this, but just to give you a flavor, I'm just going to mention a couple of these. So for example, in Apple, around 2015, one of the really great things about it was the brand reputation and the design. So, these are just a couple of strengths that really stood out. In terms of their weakness, it was their, very high price. So they had a, compared to all the other phones in the market, they had a very high price. And then in terms of opportunity, they could get into all kinds of different technology. There was this idea of the cloud technology, the automobile, technology, mobile technology. So, coming up with new technology, great opportunity for them. Threats, more competition. There were so many new competitors coming in from all around the world. There was Nokia, there was, I believe Huawei, like a bunch of different, brands that were low cost, and so these were a threat. So this just should give you a general flavor of how to do a SWOT analysis. All right. Next is another tool by the name of Growth Share Matrix. And this is a tool to understand your product and offering. And basically, if you have a company that has a lot of products that you're offering, this tool will help you understand which products or which services you should be investing in and which ones you should be divesting from. Okay, so let's say you have, again, a whole bunch of services or products your company is offering. Well, one thing that you should do if you want to use the growth share matrix is to plot it. And so you make a graph and you have on the x-axis, you have the relative competitive position also known as the market share. And on the y-axis, you have the business growth rate. So how fast is, for example, this product, how fast is it growing? Okay. And on, again, on the x-axis, how much of the market share do you have? So here it's high and low, and over here it's low and high. So just it's what you're supposed to do is take all your products that you're currently offering and plot them. And when you plot them, there are 4 segments that you can divide this graph into, and you'll see that some of your offerings are going to be in each one of these 4 quadrants. And so if, for example, it's a star product, those are the best situation. Those products are the best ones because you have a very high market share and the business growth rate is great. And you definitely, if you're the head of the organization, you want to invest over here in these particular products. And this is the one that, it's going to be generating just a lot of cash for you. It's just, everything is pretty good about this one. All right, the next kind of product is, you have a high market share, but the business in general is growing very low. Here, it could be for external reasons, it could be for many, many different reasons, but maybe, your product has been in the market for a very long time. It's, it's a mature in terms of its product life cycle. So long story short, if you're somewhere in this quadrant, the lower left quadrant, then your business, it's this product, these products are generating cash, but you may want to invest in these, but you may not want to increase your investment. Whatever investment you have you're making right now, you may want to just kind of continue that, so keep it level. If you fall in this upper right quadrant, these products are big question marks. Not a good situation necessary to be in, because you have a low market share. The business is growing fast, but you have a low market share in this business. So probably either you want to invest a lot and move these products or service offering from the question mark quadrant to the star quadrant, or you just want to sell these products or services off and just divest or shut down. And if you're in the dog, that unfortunately is the worst quadrant to be in. You have a low market share and there's overall the business growth rate is low. And so here, if your products or services are falling in this quadrant, you probably want to divest, get out of that business as soon as possible. So again, this gives you a very good understanding of, where exactly are your products or service offering, what's going on, is there a market, demand for them? Is the business growth rate really high? What's going on in terms of the market share? And that should give you a good idea of where you want to invest or divest. Next, I'm going to be talking about the last tool in terms of developing strategies in this class at least. And this one is known as Fischers 2x2 matrix. This is a tool to understand which type of supply chain is right for your product or service offering. And so this, again, it's a little bit more, supply chain oriented. All the other tools were kind of general. This is more supply chain oriented. And this is a very simple tool. And what it says is that, look, divide your products in 2 categories. One category is the functional products and the other one is the innovative products. And so if you have functional products, these are usually, products that are very predictable, stable. They have a long product life cycle, low profits, but they're just, been around in the market for a really long time. And so if you have products that you're making that are functional, then you basically want to, this will require a physically efficient supply chain strategy. And so you can see over here, if you have a functional product, you will want to have a efficient supply chain for it. And if, on the other hand, you are making innovative products, these are products that are less predictable, maybe new products that are entering the market for the first time. Such products are also, they usually have higher profits, and you try to keep a little bit more of an inventory. These kind of products require a market responsive supply chain. And so just to give you an understanding of the difference between, and again, I just want to show you this, an innovative products require responsive supply chains. So what exactly do we mean by an efficient supply chain? Okay, so in an efficient, for functional products, as I mentioned, you need an efficient supply chain. So what do we mean by an efficient supply chain strategy? That basically means that you want a supply chain where there are lots of different supply sources, a stable supply chain, a reliable supply chain, flexible, dependable lead time. So very, very just, standard, no surprises there, right? But on the other hand, if you have an innovative product, because it's a newer product, generally speaking, a market responsive supply chain generally has certain constraints, capacity constraints. There are limited suppliers. It's not very flexible. It's vulnerable to breakdowns. And the reason is because if it's something brand new, it's going to be a little bit challenging for you to find suppliers to make this product. And those suppliers may have certain capacity constraints, and there may be certain vulnerabilities or problems. But just gives you a very high level kind of a framework, about if you have an innovative product, then just expect it to have more of a market responsive supply chain. And again, if you have a functional product, then you want to design a very efficient supply chain for it. And the next two slides really gives you more details, functional versus innovative. And again, a little bit about the responsive versus the stable, efficient supply chain. It gives you a little bit more details about both of those, and you can feel free to go through them. So, hopefully with in this class, I hope you've enjoyed this class. And again, the idea is definitely not that you become subject matter experts and that, you are able to sort of just devise a strategy all of a sudden. Developing strategies is hard work. But this should give you a very good understanding that there are some amazing tools in the market that are available for you to work through, and use to make these strategies. I do also want to mention over here that it's very important for all of you to also have individual strategies. And so you should all be thinking about what your long-term goals are. And exactly, none of us have all resources on hand, but given the resources you have, it would be very good if you could make some action plans for yourself and use those action plans to actually work towards your final goal or objective. With that, I come to an end of this class, and I look forward to having an interesting question and answer session with you soon. Thank you.